Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the Davar family. This is probably going to be labeled under Cosmere Controversy. I don't know. We're going to definitely talk about the other Davar siblings, not so much about Shallan or Halloran. We'll touch on them a little bit, but I mostly want to talk about Wickham, Jushu, and what the hell is that boy's name? Jushu Balat. So I want to talk about Wickham, Jushu, and Balat. So as always, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. All right, so as we've probably, depending on when this video goes up, we've probably already talked about the Shallan mother theory. So this kind of got me thinking about it after talking about the Shallan mother theory. I was thinking about so let's kind of go based off the idea that the theory is correct. Say Lynn Davar married a herald. He had no idea she was a herald. She was the herald Chana, and as a result of all her supernatural shenanigans and the people that she know and the connections and all this kind of stuff, it resulted in Shallan having all these secrets. And the reason why Cryptics was really zeroing in on her, and the reason why she bonded to Spren so young and all this kind of stuff. Let's say it's responsible for all of that stuff. I don't agree with that, but I do kind of I think it would be kind of interesting. But the thing in my head that would cause a kind of a plot hole is if Shallan gets all this extra stuff by way of her parentage being unique and interesting, why are her other siblings kind of left out? So a lot of the main thing that kind of goes to it is that the reason why Shallan bonded two different Spren is because the Spren were very much attracted to her because they can sense something about the bond, the oath pact bond or something, because she's born from a herald or something. So like there is a lot of that kind of speculation I've seen on stuff like 17 Shard and Reddit and all this kind of stuff, right? But if that is the case, if that's true, then why wouldn't her brothers also have Spren Bonds? Actually, apart from the potential of their parentage, I'm curious as to why they don't have Spren Bonds in general. Because Lord knows they are broken enough to warrant a Spren Bond. All of them have major PTSD and have major issues. If Shallan's, granted, Shallan has a different level of trauma because she was basically the protector of her older siblings and actually killed her parents. So she has a very, very different level of trauma than they do. But just based on what we know about how the Niall bond works and how Spren chooses bonds and things, I am very surprised that none of them have bonds. So let's start off talking about Balat. So Balat is probably the most interesting of the siblings. He is obviously very traumatized. They're all traumatized by the death of their mother and the fact that most of them also witnessed the death of their father through the use of poison and through Shallan choking them and stuff. So that definitely took a toll. And just general abuse that they suffered while Lynn was still alive. So they're definitely messed up. For Balat, it kind of manifests in this way that he likes to kill small animals. It's kind of in that serial killer way where oftentimes a person with this proclivity will eventually move up to people, but he doesn't. He just kind of sticks with cremlings and small things like that, and he rips crabs apart and stuff. And he kind of basically says essentially the pain he's causing these creatures somehow alleviates the pain he constantly feels, which is just dark. Oh my god, it's just dark. It's dark and it's kind of incredibly messed up, but it's something that I would think would lead to probably a Spren Bond, because the way in which it's described is we're cracked and broken, and then when they bond the Spren, they're the cracks are filled with something stronger. So that is very much the metaphor kind of visual I have in my head. And the Davar boys are completely messed up. They're so totally shattered and messed up, just as if not more than their sister. So it amazes me that none of them have a bond. And Balat, okay, yes, his manifestation of his depression and his trauma and stuff is very violent and very dark, but I don't really think that would preclude a Spren that would stop a Spren, because I think some of the Sprens their ideologies and stuff like that, the types of bonds and oaths that they would end up making would kind of lean into some of that. I don't know, we obviously don't know the oaths for all the orders and stuff, but I kind of feel like a Dustbringer, he could something. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's probably my just inherent bias thinking Dustbringers are bad because the only Dustbringer we met was on the side of Teravangian, so which kind of sucks. I really want more Dustbringers, but so I that might be just kind of a bias. But again, he still has enough trauma and enough like backstory issues that I would expect they would get a bond. Granted, almost the entire Colin family, apart from Adolin, has a Spren bond, even though Adolin kind of has a Spren bond. So maybe having entire families with Spren bonds is just something Brandon wanted to avoid. But I am still like again, Balad has more than enough trauma and enough, PTSD and stuff in his past and in his current existence, even up to the point where they're in Urithiru, he's still dealing with stuff like I just don't understand why he doesn't have a sprint bond because he totally qualifies. And that goes for the rest of the brothers as well. So next, let's talk about Jushu. Jushu is one of the twins. Jushu and Wickham are essentially twins, but they're like fraternal twins. They don't really look, I mean, at one point they probably looked alike, but their lives have diverged so much that they don't. Like Jushu ends up gaining a lot of weight and stuff, and like they both have very sunken in eyes and everything, but like he gains a bunch of weight because he basically deals with his depression and the trauma and stuff from their past by indulging in vices. So he drinks a lot, he eats a lot, he gets really, really heavy into gambling to the point where he's almost sold into slavery because of his gambling. And Shallan saves him. Like she has to, basically literally save his life and stuff. And even after that, he kind of learns his lesson and doesn't get into as much trouble as that instance, but he still is quite messed up. He still, continues with different vices and things like that. But I would almost like that is a less, dramatic expression and manifestation of his trauma and everything than his brother. But it is very similar to someone we know who has a Spren bond. It is similar to Teft. Like Teft's guilt and stuff over basically being responsible for his family and entire village's death, which that guilt really has like resurfaced because they were all correct essentially. So that's made his fire moss addiction worse in recent times. But it's an addiction. It's a type of issue that is like a self-loathing kind of, it's the mark of basically a broken person. So the exact same reason why Teft has a Spren, I could honestly see Jushu having a Spren. And I don't really understand why he doesn't. Like, is it a proximity thing? Is it because they're Vaden? Like, are there less Radiant Spren over hanging out with Vadenar? But now he's in Urithiru, so does that even matter? I'm like, I can't really, like, it almost feels like a plot hole in a way because he's a perfect exact candidate in the same way a lot of other characters are the exact same level of candidate for a Radiant Bond. So it's just like, why not? So it's just very fascinating. Or going back to the Shallan mother theory, like, could that be a thing? Could only the cryptics seem to be very hippie, like they are very just, we like lies, but we like truth. We know math, but all this regular typical stuff is like whatever. So they seem to be a lot more lackadaisical. So I'm wondering if the cryptics would have just been like, okay, yes, I'll bond regardless. But the other Spren are very hesitant to bond anybody else because of their connection to a herald. Maybe that could be an explanation for why they don't have Spren bonds, while also being an explanation for why Shallan has two Spren bonds. So I guess that could be a thing. Maybe that's a brand new theory just popped up in my head. Who knows? But again, I say for the exact same reason Teft has a Spren bond, I can see Jushu having a Spren bond. And the same goes with Wickham. And it's interesting. It kind of like as we go, their level of depression and PTSD manifestation is like quite different. Like, I think Jushu probably has the less, or even though it almost got him killed and sold into slavery and stuff like that, I think it has, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to compare traumas or anything like that, so let me not. But Wickham, his trauma and stuff manifests as his heavy, deep depression to the point where he carries around poisonous plants. I can't remember what it's called. Blackbane, I think it's called, something like that. He carries the same, basically leaves Kaladin was holding on to in Way of Kings. He was holding on to them for years. And, like, he was very suicidal, was very much thinking about taking himself out and everything. And, like, was, manifesting his trauma and stuff was coming out as very, very, hard depression and stuff. So that is basically like Kaladin, even though Kaladin has different levels of trauma and stuff like that based on the individual things he's experienced and all that, which makes sense. But the hard line being, trauma-based depression and stuff is a Spren Bond qualifier. Like maybe they don't exemplify any of the other ideals, like, you know, protecting or anything like that, which is why Shallan was so much better for cryptics, because, you know, covering up her mother's death, like with her dad and stuff, kind of lend, you know, those lies and all this kind of stuff. But they all lied about the way their mom died, and then they all eventually lie about the way their dad died. So that doesn't even feel like an explanation for me. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but again, he has like the only thing that really kind of brings him out. Honestly, later on, I can understand why Wickham doesn't get a Spren Bond, because when Shallan gives him all these math problems and stuff, that seems to be like his lantern in the darkness. Like even though he's probably still, you know, depressed and deals with a lot of that stuff, when he gets to sit down and work on these equations and stuff, that seems to like really help him. So he's always like seen with some equations and stuff. And I think it's also kind of interesting. I mean, maybe it'll happen later. Maybe he does become an Arden or a Storm Warden or something like that later. But like, I could see him adjusting to becoming a regular person, like kind of thing, more than the others. But I find it fascinating. I think they all do technically kind of qualify as people that would make sense to have Spren Bonds, but they don't. And then Helleran is an exception to that, but not really. Like Halloran was on his way to getting a Spren Bond. It seems as though the Stormbreakers wanted him to, or the Skybreakers wanted him to do something for them as a show of loyalty, to show that he deserves a Spren Bond before they allowed him to start taking the oaths and things. Or they just wanted to use him because he had access to get to Amaram or something. But it seemed like he was on the path to getting a Spren Bond, but in an inorganic way. Even though it seems like the Skybreakers all attain their Spren in a fairly inorganic way, more being chosen and stuff instead of just like the Spren choosing and that kind of thing. So maybe it's not too out of the ordinary, but it seems like it's an inorganic kind of way to go about it. So therefore, it still, you know, leaves him in that same thing. But Halloran was also much older. He's the oldest, so when all this stuff went down, he was much older, much more, you know, mentally developed and stuff. So I think he processed a lot of that trauma and stuff in a different way than his other siblings did, in a way that didn't cause him too much lasting damage. But it clearly caused damage because their family associations with secret societies and stuff, which is how he ended up with Skybreakers and how he got stabbed in the face. So it still didn't work out for him. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I really think that the Davar brothers all should basically have a Spren Bond, because based on the way we know bonds kind of manifest, they more than qualify. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing that Brandon kind of avoided it. I mean, there is a number of orders that clearly have been getting bonds and stuff like that we just haven't seen, like at all. So there's more than enough room for you to say, oh, they bonded, blah, 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 and went off somewhere, just, you know, never crossed paths as far as their missions and stuff with Shallan or something. Like, there's ways to do it, but maybe them not having Spren Bonds is another clue for something else. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think about it? Why do you think the Davar brothers like don't have Spren Bonds? Do you think it's because their proximity to a potential herald, or do you think it's specifically because they don't have a connection to a specific herald or something? Let me know about that in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to support the channel, you can check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. And if you can't support me that way, the old-fashioned way works with a good old like and a subscription to the channel. And don't forget to leave a comment, because the algorithm loves it. So as always, I will talk to you all next time. Peace.